always forget to do that. We want to make sure that this session is accessible for folks later who cannot join. I want to introduce to you all Dr. Megan Regan, who is the chair of the Urban Food Policy Council. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
We also have Carol Eichmeyer here today. There we go. Hello, good morning. Reverend David Harrison.
Good morning, everybody.
And we also have Brandon Williams, who's going to be leading this morning session along with Mary Jac Brenan. Brandon, you want to say hello?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And Mary Jac, thank you so much for being here and collaborating with Brandon on today's, this morning's topic on urban farming. So let me go ahead and pull up my slide deck and I will pass it along to Brandon. Brandon, is there anything you want to say before we get started?
No, we can go ahead and jump right in.
Okay. So I think Mary Jac, then we're going to pass it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be with y'all this morning. And I know that y'all had a session yesterday on policy, so I might be, this might be a little bit of a repeat, but there was a zoning ordinance passed in 2015 that actually allowed for the growing of plants and on empty lots. So, or lots that did not have a structure on them. Prior to that time, you had to have a building on a lot in order to have even a community garden. So this created the doorway for urban agriculture to be able to be practiced in Winston-Salem. And it is for growing of plants. So next slide, please. Thank you. So, I'm here to talk about urban farming, and this is actually, I love this shot. This is the lot that on Cleveland and 22nd, where we did urban farm school for several years. But urban farms can be developed, in the middle of the urban core, and it will help improve food security in so many ways. The people that are actually doing the farming can, raise some funds and food for their family. Next slide, please. It also improves the environment. One of the things about the urban core, and of course I'm speaking to the choir here, I know that, but one of the things about the urban core is there's a lot of pavement. And so anytime we're able to, preserve ground and grow green plants, we're actually improving the ecological environment for the city. And so soil being improved, it actually not only are you growing plants, but you're providing a place for rainwater to infiltrate the ground and not run off into a gutter. Our biggest water polluter is actually sediment. And so if you think about all the dirt and soil that we lose, when it rains, when we get a heavy rain in the city, the more that we can do to improve our soils for growing and also water infiltration, it'll be better for all of us. Next slide, please. And, there are many, many skills with with farming, and, you need to have a knowledge of science and biology, a little bit of physics, how this material world actually functions. So farmers are really creative folks, and they're developing skills. All of these things are going to improve our local communities in terms of a skills base. And so I always encourage people to think about urban farms as being, workforce training, because farmers have to be very independent. They're going to do their own, they're going to set up their irrigation. They're not going to be hiring out all of this work. They're going to learn how to do it themselves. And so I think it's a great way for folks to, improve their skill set and raise the skill levels in our community. Next slide, please. And then, we can also see that once a well-functioning urban farm and community garden, of course, Cameron's going to talk about that later today, but can boost property values and promote community engagement. I know when we were doing the farm at Cleveland and 22nd, a lot of the neighbors, of course, there was a lot of foot traffic, people walking back and forth to stores and to the bus stop and walking by just to see what we were doing. And there was a lot of interest. And the more interest there is in what you're doing, you've got more eyes on your project, which can be a very positive thing. You can have actually more community engagement, just one-on-one with your neighbors. But the neighbors also became very interested in the food that we were growing. And so there was an opportunity to teach about how to grow food. And we were also able to encourage them to eat more healthily as well. And with urban farms, you're actually raising food to sell. So it's not so much that you're giving food away. So I won't address that. I would imagine Cameron might talk about that later with community gardening. Next slide, please. So how do you get started? And this is a real quick overview, but you first want to identify a site that's appropriate for farming and has the acceptable zoning classification. So, the fact that we have a zoning ordinance does make urban agriculture, urban farming possible, but you want to make sure you're doing it in the right zoning area, and we'll look at that. You need a site that's going to get 8 hours of sunlight minimum. We usually say 8 to 10 hours of sunlight. If you're growing a lot of greens, if you're only growing greens or leafy plants where you're not actually harvesting a fruit, you can get away with about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. But if you're trying to grow tomatoes or squash or cucumbers, you need that. You need to be on the upper end of the sunlight spectrum. You need access to water, clean soil. If you don't have clean soil, and I'm going to address that in another slide, you need to have the ability to build raised beds. You want a site that has less than 3% grade, and actually 3% grade is pretty steep. So that's the minimum, that's the minimum grade that you want to have. I'm not saying that right. Anyway, you want a level site is what I'm trying to say. You want good airflow. Protection from wildlife, because believe it or not, we do have, often what happens in the city is we have varmints like groundhogs. And I know there's somebody joining us today who could probably teach a whole class in groundhogs with her garden. You need accessibility for harvesting, and you also need room for your operation. So you want to think through what is it you're going to be growing. I know on our, in the ordinance, you need to have your growing area 5 feet back from the property lines. And so you need to plan for that as well. So if you don't have property and you see maybe and I'm talking hypothetically here, I'm not with the city, so this is an idea, but let's say you're in Winston and you see a lot that meets all of those specifications. It's got minimum sunlight, it's got access to water, that the soil, you've done some research, so the soil is going to be clean, but you don't own that property. Well, you want to contact the owner and work out a memorandum of understanding for the use of the land. And it could be that and it is a good idea to have this as a written agreement. It doesn't have to be, drafted by a lawyer unless you are a lawyer, but you can, there's some really good references for memorandum of understandings or memorandum of agreement for use of land that are available. I think you could probably talk to Cameron and she might have access to some of those. I know the Community Garden Association has some on their website as a resource, just a template. But maybe you can offer to you'll maintain the land if they'll let you use it, because if they're in the city, they're having to pay to have that grass cut, or either they're going to get fined. Maybe you offer to provide a certain amount of produce as a trade. You come up with some sort of agreement where you're not necessarily having to put money out of your pocket, but you are doing something to trade to use that land. So those are just some ideas. There are also, and I know we've got people on this in this Zoom today too, that maybe there is a church that has land that they'll let you use, or maybe there's a another kind of organization that has a big lot, and they're having to pay to have all the grass cut, and maybe you can offer to do the farming and part of that. And you'd want to work out the agreement about your farm is not going to always be the front of the Better Homes and Garden magazine look. So you need to be sure that you let your landlord know that you're not going to always have it looking pristine, but that you won't let it. You come up with a level of mess, I'm going to say it like that they will abide. You never want to have it trashy. But there are times when we get a frost and plants don't look so great. So that's, something that you need to make sure your landlord's aware of. Next slide, please. So you can find the zoning classifications at this site. It's the Forsyth County tax site. And when you go to that site, if you'll click on the planning app, you can actually put the address of the lot you're interested in farming on, and it will bring up that plot, and it will tell you what the zoning classification is. So if you are looking at a residential area to do your urban farming in, you will have to have go before the zoning board of adjustment for a hearing. And what you will be getting is a special use permit, and it's $25. On the right of this slide, you'll see there's a little site plan. So you will be required to have a site plan drawn for your, how are you going to do your farm? If you're going to have any structures on it, where are they going to be located? So you're just basically doing a scale drawing of your plan. And it doesn't have to be set in stone. You may not know, you don't have to tell them, well, I'm going to do carrots here and potatoes here. You're just showing them where your growing areas are and how you would access the property. And if you have more questions about that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the site plan. Next slide, please. So I've got, I think, 3 slides here that just show you the zoning classifications. Basically, this first one, you will have to have that hearing if it's a residential zoning classification. And you can go to the next slide. And even multifamily residential zoning districts are, you can do urban farms in those zoning classifications. And community gardens. And then the non-residential zoning districts, these do not require a hearing. So if it's, any of those classifications, the first one, AG, is ag. So if it's already zoned for ag, which I don't know, I haven't ever done a search to see if there's any land within the city limits that's zoned ag or not. I know that the city has grown and taken in some existing farms that were zoned ag, but it could be the zoning was changed once they were, taken into the city limits. Those farms are still able to function because they were grandfathered in. But anyway, those other classifications, if you found that in the city, you would not have to have that hearing. Next slide, please. So a couple of just some things about soil and water. You want to make sure the soil is safe to grow in. And probably the most important thing to know is what was the prior use of the land? What happened there before you decided to farm? Was there a house that was taken down? Was the house built, before 75? Then there's probably going to be some chance of there being some lead in the soil. Find out what happened on that property before you were going to do your farm. You can soil test for heavy metals. This is not cheap. It's usually around, you test for certain metals. So that's why it's very important to know what happened on that site before you were going to farm. It usually is going to run you around $200 to $300 for a full panel of heavy metal testing there. If you find that there's been something, maybe there was a prior use that you're not comfortable with, where you could potentially have some heavy metal in the soil, then grow in raised beds with what we call engineered soil, and that's soil that's been prepared. There are a lot of good places you can make your own with compost and maybe purchase some soil, some topsoil, or you could just buy a raised bed soil from one of the fine purveyors in our community. Now, there is a site. As you're doing your research on prior use, you can go to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality website, and they've got a inactive hazardous sites map. So if you Google that, it'll bring up that map, and or it's probably easier to do that than go into their website. But you can click on that for Winston-Salem, and it'll show you anything that's around. And that's also just you doing your due diligence, because you are raising food that you would be, people are going to be eating, and you want to make sure that it's safe. And also, if you're working in that soil, you could be contaminating, if you're not wearing gloves, your hands could actually you could contaminate your body by working in that soil. Next slide, please. Make sure you have safe water for irrigation. And if you are doing an urban farm, you are going to need to irrigate, because one of the things about farming, I'm assuming this is being done, we're talking about food access, but farms are, you're farming to raise a consistent crop so that you have food that's available. You're not dependent on the weather. So that's why you will irrigate. City water works really well. It's fine for irrigation, and it's excellent for food safety, because we know we have, and gosh, didn't Winston-Salem just win some award for our water, or at least for a water tank with an otter on it? So it was quite beautiful. But you may have a meter on site. They're not inexpensive. So if that's something, if there is not a meter and you're having to get a meter put in, you're going to have to pay for the meter, and you're also going to have to pay for a plumber. So could be an expense right there. We do have access to I think we still have access to fire hydrant meters in the city of Winston-Salem through the utility department. So if you've got a fire hydrant close by.
Mary Jac, we do not, we're not allowed to use that anymore. There's a new policy in place. Mm-hmm.
Darn. That'd be something for the Food Policy Council to work on. Making water available. So unfortunately, the fire hydrant meter is not an option, but what I have actually seen folks do before is, if they made a agreement with a next door neighbor who had water, and they would use the water and then pay the person's water bill. And for the time of year when they were using it, And then they would also share some of their vegetables with them. But drip irrigation is the best for growing vegetables intensively. And it is not that expensive to set up. You can set up a pretty decent system for $100 or less. Rainwater harvesting into a cistern is an option where you're collecting rainwater off of a roof. You want to make sure that it's a safe roof. If it's just your typical architectural shingles, you're going to need to have a screen going into the cistern to collect any particles that come off of the roof. There are food safety concerns with using rainwater, and it may not work great in drip irrigation system either, or you may just have to flush it more often. So, if you don't have any other options for water, definitely rainwater harvesting, storing it in a cistern. I would keep the cistern as cool as you can, maybe shade it somehow, and that'll lessen some of your algae growth that you would have. Next slide, please. So what to grow? Well, in terms of, if we're just talking about access, that's kind of another issue. I'm going to go from the farm, the commercial aspect here. What to grow? Well, you want to survey your neighbors. What would they be interested in buying? Visit farmers markets and see what is there. Think about what's not at the farmers market, because that's where you have a potential to, have a niche where you would have a product that people would want, because it hasn't been available in the market. You also want to inventory, what assets do you have? What kind of tools do you have? What skills do you have? What's your knowledge base? Do you have a lot of experience with, growing already? So choose crops that are suited for our growing conditions and that you can have success with. We'll see lots of beautiful things in the Johnny's seed catalog, and we can grow many of those things, but you want to make sure when you're picking varieties that you're picking things that will grow in our heat. That's probably the biggest thing you need to think about. Next slide, please. So here's our growing conditions. This is the USDA the plant hardiness zone map. We're in zone 7B. We have an average rainfall of 45 inches. Of course, for the last few years, we've been over that, but that is still considered our average. Our first frost is August 15th, and our last average frost is April 15th. So think about, that's your growing season right there. You can extend your season on both ends by about a month with row covers. And if you really want to get serious, you could build a high tunnel and maybe even do year-round farming. But season extension definitely can help you with your farm cash flow. A longer growing season equals a longer selling season. And so if you were doing this not only to provide food, but to improve your family's economic situation, you need to think about cash flow and how long you're going to be able to be at the market or selling to neighbors. Next slide, please. Take advantage of educational offerings. Of course, NC Cooperative Extension offers many free classes online. They've got some great stuff on gardening right now. All the states in the United States have extension programs, and many of them offer classes online as well. That's one thing that the pandemic has done for us. Check out ATRA. That is atra.org. They've got lots of great resources for sustainable agriculture. They've got some really good handouts on, starting as a market gardener. It goes over equipment needs. It's just an excellent resource. I would encourage you to visit that site. Of course, there are things like Organic Growers School, which is kind of out in the Western area. They're doing a lot of stuff online. Also, Carolina Farm Stewardship Association is a trade association for sustainable ag in North and South Carolina, and they've been around a long time. They have an excellent conference in November, and I know last year it was all virtual. And then a lot of folks, probably everybody, is watching YouTube and watching Curtis Stone and all the different folks that we know. So yeah, I'm looking at what Brandon wrote. So definitely take advantage of educational opportunities to improve your knowledge base, but it also gives you an opportunity to network with others. And that leads me to my next slide, please. So network with other farmers in the area, other farmers and growers. It's a potential for you to share, ideas and resources and tools and labor. I've known folks that have helped each other build high tunnels. They, will help you this season, and then you come help me next season. It helps you keep abreast of trends too. You'll talk about stuff. Farmers tend to be very generous in sharing what they know, and they're encouraging, because it is a very hard work and it's not for the faint of heart by any means. But you do want to grow a community of support, whether it's from the people who buy from you, or or eat your food, or your fellow farmers. Next slide, please. Market your urban farm. So do it through, most of the farmers in our area do it through direct sales at farmers markets, or through CSA boxes, and those are community supported agriculture boxes. It's a good idea to have some sort of online presence. You may not want to start with that, because it's quite a undertaking just getting the infrastructure of your farm up and running, but you can use eventually use online store software to simplify transactions, whether it's having a website or Facebook page and using something like Square as an example, or you can, I think Brandon has put one in the chat box. There's another one called Barn to Door. There are many of them out there that are really good. Use social media to promote what you're growing, and why you're an urban farmer. Use social media to tell your story. A lot of folks are now using Instagram, as a sales platform, and to drive sales to a website. And you have a pretty picture of something you've grown or you've just harvested, or a scene at your urban farm, and you're going to engage people, and they want to support you. They want to connect with you. People who will be your best customers, they want to connect with who's growing their food, because you're living the dream as the urban farmer. Next slide, please. I'm about to close. So I want to encourage you, once you get your farm up and going, you want to really protect your resources, because your resources are your soil, your water. You also want to, relate well to your customers, because those are your resources as well. And, even if you were raising, I say even, perhaps your farm model is to raise food to provide, food for a food pantry, and you're not selling it. You still want to, those folks at the food pantry are your customers. And so you want to connect with them and stay in touch with them. That's part of your farming resource. But definitely invest in soil renewal. When we are growing vegetables intensively, we're working that soil hard. And so you want to either be, you definitely want to be rotating your crops. You may want to be investing in cover cropping. If you've got small space, you may be relying more on composting and maybe even purchasing compost. But definitely protect your farming resources. Keep good records. That's going to help you do a better job with all of the work that you're doing. It'll help you, sometimes, and there are lots of really good record keeping, even if it's just Google Sheets on your phone, you can keep good records. And also take care of yourself, because you are, you're out there farming. You need to be observant. You need to be present with what's happening on the land, so that you can make the best decisions about, how your crop is doing. And I think, I think that's it, isn't it, Tiffany? Is there another slide? Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
That's my part. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or I did not look at the chat.
There was mostly sharing of resources.
Good.
Go ahead,
Good.
Brandon. Brandon, were you saying something?
Yeah, as far as small remnants in terms of incorporating chickens, bees, and so forth, MJ, how will one go to, or would you suggest one incorporating that into their urban farm? A lot of folks think of just vegetables, but what about other value, well, not value added, but other other options in terms of flowers, small remnants, whether it be bees, chickens for eggs, or things of that nature? Could you
Well, I know that there are specific rules about chickens in the city. And so you want to make sure that you are complying with the rules that the city has in place. If you have a small lot, you're going to be limited to, I think it's 3 to 5 chickens. So you want to think in terms of, is that the best use of my land, or could I make more money? And part of that, Brandon, depends on what's your goal. And so when I'm talking about farming, I'm thinking about, I want to make the best use of my land that I can. And I didn't even go into the whole thing of, business planning or any of that, but you decide what your goals are with your farm. If you want to have some eggs, if you've got a small lot, you are not going to make enough. You're not going to get enough eggs to be able to sell at the market. You may get enough eggs for your family. If you want to have bees, that's another topic. There are some skills involved with beekeeping, so I would encourage people, if you're interested in that, to take a beekeeping class. If you have, there are no, at this point in time, to my knowledge, there are no zoning rules about beekeeping in the city. I think there's some recommendations. And in most situations in other cities where I've seen a lot of beekeeping going on in the urban core, the most important thing is to somehow create a separation from the hive to the public. So you may need to do a fence and do some signage so that you tell people, beware, because if there are people who are allergic and they get stung, that could come back on you as the beekeeper. So you just want to, have some signage. The Wachovia Community Garden over in Old Salem, I think they've got several beehives over there, and they've got it separated, and they've got some signage to explain, what they have. So back to what you were getting at, Brandon, I recommend, you want to do some research, maybe go do some research at the markets, the farmers markets, and see what is selling, number one, what's selling out, what high value crops are there that you could potentially be successful with. Maybe it is fresh herbs. Maybe it is, you know, cut flowers.
Right.
You know, do some research, find out what is selling, and then match that to your skill level. Maybe you're not quite up to growing baby ginger yet, so take a class in how to do that, you know, and then you can get really good at it. And baby ginger is one of those high value crops. So did that answer your question?
Yes. So, and that's going to allow me to segue into my next question. So with that being said, would you suggest or recommend one that wanted to get started in urban farming to do sort of like a market analysis to kind of see what the demands are versus, because, you know, I know a lot of people who may start and they may say, well, I like this, or I may like this particular crop, but it's not really feasible in terms of a market presence. So would you recommend, you know, those who want to, engage in urban farming from a proprietary standpoint to kind of do a market assessment to see what crops are in demand and which crops can be grown based upon what type of land and resources that are available and afforded to them?
Most definitely, really good point. And I think what happens is there's a lot of romance with farming and gardening, and that's probably good because it is really hard work. And you know, if you knew how hard of a work it is, you know, and then we've got the vagaries of weather on top of that. If you knew all of that going in, you probably wouldn't go in. So, but seriously, you know, do that market analysis. And I mentioned, what are your skills? You know, do a self inventory. And they're actually, ATRA, I think, has a really good document on, you know, it's a self inventory for farmers to determine how they want to sell. You know, do you want to do wholesale? Well, an urban farm is probably not going to do wholesale because you won't make any money. You know, do you want to interact? How do you want to interact with your customer? You know, whether your customer is a food pantry or whether it's people buying straight from your farm. And that's another thing I didn't mention. You can sell directly off your farm. You could set up a little table and have a little farmer's market right at your site. You just have to be cognizant of parking, and that's part of that site plan. You have to show where, you know, how are people going to access your property. Yeah, do that. Do a market analysis and a self inventory, you know, to get yourself going.
Now, in addition to that, what are your thoughts and feedback in terms of value added products? Because a lot of times we have those who enter into the market and they're looking at just straight to consumer in terms of the fresh produce or product. But what are your thoughts on value added products in terms of your urban farm initiative?
I think that is the way to go. You want to have that fresh crop, but if you think about it, everybody else has that fresh crop at the same time you have that fresh crop. If you've got a value-added product that is available maybe even year-round, that's something that not everyone's going to have, and you can really distinguish yourself. So, you know, it could be it could even be body products. You know, it doesn't have to be something you eat. It could be salves and soaps and, you know, potpourris and things like that. So you can think very creatively. We do have a little bit of we need to have more commercial kitchen space in our area. We are definitely at a deficit for that.
Absolutely.
So that, you know, depending on what products you're making, you are going to have to find a commercial kit. You're either going to have to get your kitchen certified, or you're going to have to find a commercial kitchen or go with a co-packer. And so all of those things, you know, it really is very much, you're running a business. It's also very satisfying and rewarding for those of us who love plants, but it is a business.
Now, with that being,
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry. I meant to say,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
well,
off.
I interrupted you because the thing about the value-added product is the other thing you can think about is if you've got a lot of something you've grown in the season and you cannot sell it all, or it cannot all be used, rather than wasting it, turn that into a value-added project.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a relish, now you have to have a certified kitchen, whether it's a relish or a salsa or something like that, a soup mix. So you can be creative.
Let me ask you a question. In terms of, pardon me, I know as far as some of the certifications, we touched on that lightly on yesterday's session. What about cost sharing as a way to kind of offset certain expenses for those who want to get, let's say, organic certification or things of that nature? In terms of getting certification is going to add value to that entity in terms of the market space, whether it's greater agricultural practices and organic certification. Could you kind of share with us a little bit more on cost sharing and the value in terms of cost sharing and collaboration and consortium in terms of that's concerned?
Yeah, so our North Carolina Department of Agriculture, which is that's separate from Cooperative Extension, is part of NCA&T and part of NC State. NC Department of Agriculture is a Department of State. And so that is the department in our state that deals with farmers markets and any kind of regulation regarding agriculture. They offer cost share for, they do, we have not talked about this, but they do what's called good agricultural practices auditing or gap audits. And that's if somebody is going to be selling into a grocery store or to a daycare that gets federal funds, or they're going to have to be GAP certified. So good agricultural practices. So NCDA, North Carolina Department of Agriculture, because they know that this is a obstacle for many farmers because it's expensive to get GAP certified. They will cost share with you. You pay for the audit, and then they will pay you back for half of your expenses. They also do that for water testing. So if you have city water, you don't need to worry about it, and you don't qualify if you're using city water. If you're using well water, or if you were to be using pond water, which I don't think you would ever be doing that in the city, but if you were doing that, maybe you would, you have to have that tested in order to make sure that it's food safe if you're using it for irrigation. And that's expensive too, because you have to pay for those water tests. So they will cost share on that as well. So they will pay for half of that. You pay for it, and then they send you you apply for the cost share, and they'll send you back half of the money. So those are good things that the North Carolina Department of Agriculture is doing to help us. Now, there's also the federal government has what's called, as part of USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's the Natural Conservation Resource Service, NRCS. I didn't say that right. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have some cost share programs too. And those are around irrigation, cover cropping. They will pay a good bit for high tunnels. So that is something you have to have a farm number, a USDA farm number, to qualify for those programs with NRCS. But you can get a farm number from, throwing out a lot of initials here, Farm Service Agency, which is located in the same building that Cooperative Extension is in, on Fairchild Road. You would get your USDA farm number or FSA farm number from them. And there are three things you have to have. You have to have, either you have to have the lease agreement, or if you own the land, you need to show that you own it. You need to share your social security number, and you need to have the ability to make $1,000 off of that land. You don't have to have made the $1,000, but you have to have the ability to make the $1,000. So then you would, you apply for that farm number. And I think I know Michael has a farm number. Brandon, do you have a farm number?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So did I miss anything on that?
No. What about, could you kind of give us a little bit overview in terms of the community supported agriculture, the CSA, in terms of a market outlet for enterprise and urban farmers?
Yes, yeah, that's a great way to go. And so a CSA box at community supported agriculture, the idea is that people are going to invest in you for access to a certain amount of food. So they're agreeing, and you can set it up any way you want to. You can say, all right, at the beginning of the season, you're going to pay me a certain amount of money, and then I'm going to provide you with boxes every week with produce in them. Or there are other farmers that'll say, you just pay me every week and I'll provide you a box. So that's a really good way for urban farmers to have some income, dependable income, and not have to go to a farmer's market. You are, cultivating a community that's going to be supporting you, and you can plan however many shares, they call them shares. If you buy a box, that's considered a share. So, however many shares or boxes you're going to be providing, that can help you plan what you need to grow. So I recommend, if you're just starting out, go slow with that, because you don't want to disappoint people because they'll remember it. So you want to have a small success and then build on that. But CSAs are a great way to go. Big thing with CSA boxes is communication. You need to make sure that you are, staying in touch with your customer base, letting them know what to expect, keeping them excited. There's so many food boxes that are available, through, I know I've experienced the HelloFresh, subscription series. I don't know if any of y'all, there are other ones, but this is a local option. And so you really want to be promoting that, these are locally grown fresh produce at the height of it, harvested at the height of its nutritional value. And and then people are also supporting a local farmer and all the good stuff that means.
Now, with that, in addition to that, could you kind of touch bases on the on-site farmer stand? If one chooses to have their entity showcased on that property on site, could you kind of briefly give us an overview in terms of the on-site food market, curb market?
Sure. So, if you're farming at your home, which there's no reason you can't do that. If it's a residential, actually, if it's your house, you don't even have to go through a special, you don't have to go through the permitting process. Thank you, Irma. But you can sell right at if you grew it, you can sell it right at your property. You cannot bring in things from other places and sell. That's the caveat right there. So it needs to be things that you grew. Now, for North Carolina Department of Agriculture, they say that you have to grow 51% of what you sell. That's a little,
Now, is that on site, MJ? Is that 51% on that particular site, or is that in general and you can transfer it to the site?
That's what NCDA says. You need to have grown 51% of what you are selling.
Is that for that particular site? So what I'm asking is, if a person was to come to that site, do they need to grow 51% of what's on that site, or then do they need to just grow 51% of what they have in general, and they can kind of transfer to that market space and go that route? So
I don't
wanted to be
know.
clear.
That would be a question for NCDA. One of the things that we ran into in Forsyth County a few years ago, there was a person who had set up a produce stand, and it was all locally grown produce, but the majority of it was not from, she was not growing she wasn't growing anything. And so they said, that's a grocery store. That's a different kind of animal. You know, you don't qualify for, you know, she had to get a business license, and there were neighbors that were complaining, you know, because of traffic and whatnot. But so I'm not sure, Brandon. I think the rule is you're supposed to be growing 51% on site of what you sell. Excuse me.
Okay, and another thing, I know a lot of farmers and proprietors have been curious to know what are some of the antecedents to get organically certified. I know the term, you can't really apply that term to your product unless you're certified. So what are some of the, if you can give us an overview or the value of being organically certified? Is there a true value in that, or could one be successful in terms of being able to generate that same flow if they were to label their operation as using organic practices? So what is some of the value in being certified organic, the time frame, versus just being an entity that uses good GAP?
Well, there are people you will be able to charge more for your product if you have that organic certification label, but it's going to cost you more to produce that product.
Is there a cost share, MJ? Because I know one time, as far as doing the organic piece, there was a cost share opportunity. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm not sure about that right at this moment. Since I've been retired, I haven't kept up with that, but I did just have a incident. I'm helping somebody with some food safety stuff, so I researched about the cost share for food safety. I'm not sure, but NCDA often offers a cost share for organic certification. Now, the thing about organic certification is you are, you know, that's a third party audit, and you know, so there's that verification. It's not just somebody saying that they're using organic practices, whether they, you know, they could be a good person and honestly doing that, but there are people out there that will say that and they're not. Or organic is in the, you know, the mind, the you know, the eye of the beholder. But the thing about organic certification is it does mean that you are not using any genetically modified, there's no GMO products in your production practices. And that's important to some people, you know, so that's another qualifying thing that the USDA certified organic seal does give you. Now, if you sell less than, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to go to the National Organic, the NOP page on USDA, because they've got it very well outlined there about what you can and cannot do. But if you sell less than $5,000 worth of product, and you use all the organic practices and procedures and keep your records, you can use that organic symbol. If you sell more than 5,000, you have to go through a certification process. But it is, you know, USDA expects you, if you're using that symbol and selling less than $5,000, they expect you to meet all of the criteria that somebody who's going through certification does as well.
Now with that, I know we went over some value added products. What about some value added processes? I know in terms of when we're doing, the initial site selection, we're looking at seed viability and we're looking at the growth, but what should we focus on in terms of post-harvest handling? What are some of the things that you would encourage one to look at in terms of post-harvest handling?
Well, that's probably one of the most important areas. I mean, all of it's important, but you can raise a good crop, but then if you harvest it and you take it to market and it's all wilted, people aren't going to buy it. So definitely think about having good food safety practices where you're using clean containers for harvesting. You're harvesting at the cool of the day. There's a really good resource put out by the Center for Environmental Farming Systems on post-harvest handling. And I don't have access to it right at this moment, but I can send that to Tiffany if she wants to share it later. And it tells you, how to handle every crop that we would be harvesting in North Carolina and, the direct market kind of crops. So I'll be glad to share that. I'm about to cough, so I'm going to. I think the pollen's getting to me.
Uh-oh.
But let's see. I don't know what else. Brandon, what else about post-harvest? You want to use clean tools that can be, they actually do not recommend using wooden handled knives.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because anything that wood can harbor biological.
Absolutely.
You want to use plastic containers for harvesting. You want to keep your harvest containers up off the ground when you're harvesting. And
what about in terms of like the rinse, wash, and pack type of situation?
Well, so what's really recommended for small farms is if you don't need to wash it, don't. If you've got greens and they're real gritty, you may need to wash them. And if you do wash them, if you're using city water, you're in good shape. You want to use, you want to rinse them really well and let them dry as much as possible before you would pack them. Water is going to be the carrier of any microorganisms, and water also is going to start the degradation process of the leaves or the crop that you've harvested. So if you don't have to wash it, don't. If you can wipe it off with a paper towel, do that, like tomatoes and things like that. Tell your customers to wash their produce. That's what you want to do. Now, I really do not recommend using synthetic pesticides in an urban setting. I would recommend using organic pesticides. So I'm not against using pesticides. I just would recommend using the organic pesticides. Those
are typically OMRI certified, right?
Yes. Yeah. And they are going to be, they have a shorter half-life in the environment. They're going to be much safer. They're biologicals. And so they're much safer. They're a part of nature. But they're formulated in a way that still, is going to kill a pest. So you need to make sure that you read the label and follow all those directions. But so I got into the pesticide conversation because thinking about when you're selling your produce, you don't have 7 or malathion or something toxic on it, that you need to wash off. So that, just tell your customers to wash their produce before they eat it.
Now, I know we spoke briefly about in terms of from the market standpoint as far as consumable goods, but what about stuff that we don't consume as far as cut flowers and things of that nature? Is there really a market for that, MJ? And if so, can you kind of
Oh, yeah.
elaborate on that just briefly?
There is a great market for cut flowers, more and more. And I think social media has helped with that. And also people's consciousness being raised about, flowers that are coming from abroad have some pretty heavy duty chemicals on them. And so if you think about, I'm bringing these flowers, to beautify my home, and yet now it's covered with pesticides. I'm bringing that into my home. That's something to think about. So people are much more interested in supporting local. We've got some really good flower growers in Forsyth County, and there's, I would go to the market and see what they're selling, and, definitely check Instagram, see what's selling out. We've got, there's probably room in the market for that. There's several people that are doing flower CSAs, where you get a bunch of flowers every week. Now, you don't want to call it an arrangement, you call it a bouquet. If it's an arrangement, you have to charge tax. So if you don't want to get into the tax world about that, then you call it a bouquet or a bunch, either one. So yeah, and fresh herbs, that's another. People are doing so much more cooking at home now due to the pandemic, and people are interested in flavors and seasonings, and so herbs would be a great way to go too, with and there's some perennial herbs like rosemary and thyme and oregano that are so easy to grow. And so that's something, think about perennials. You're not having to plant them every year, so you're cutting down on your labor, which that's going to help you anytime you can save time on labor. As far as what flowers to grow, there's an association called the American Association of Cut Flower Growers. Excuse me, y'all, for coughing. I would recommend looking at their website, and they've got regional recommendations for what's good to grow. That's a great organization.
Now, as a proprietor and an enterprise and agripreneur, what would you say the 3 keys to being successful in your initiative in terms of being a market producer? What would you say your 3 primary attributes would be?
Well, I think you've got to be in touch with the market. You need to, so that you need to really know what is selling, what's missing, what the demand is. So you need to know your market. You need to know the people that you are interested in providing food to. What are their likes and dislikes? There's a lot of emphasis on what is, I'm blanking on the word, but people need convenience. That's the word I was looking for. So you need to be thinking about your people and how to make what you're doing convenient for them in all aspects of your operation. Whether it's the pickup for the CSA, whether it's the size of the bunch that you're going to give them, because people don't want to be overwhelmed with, wow, what am I going to do with all these turnips, So think about your people. And then the third thing is, I think you've got to be, you need to know yourself and what your, that self-inventory, and ask for help when you need it. Don't think that you can do it all, but also, rely on your creativity and your, what is it, the impetus that got you into this in the first place? So stay in touch with that, but be willing to ask for help when you need it. And there's a lot of help out there.
Absolutely. So I guess unique value is what really separates, everyone, being able to create and promote that unique value.
Mhm.
Based on that, MJ, what would you say in terms of, I know you touched bases on it briefly, but can you kind of give us a little bit of an overview of what co-packing is for those of us who may not be aware of what a co-packer or what that type of relationship is?
Sure. So there are some companies, some food processing companies that will, you can hire them to run a small batch for you, and they will take care of the labeling. They've already gotten all of the certifications and label making processes and canning, and they've gotten everything taken care of. So you're basically paying them to run a small batch for you. And probably a lot of you have seen the Dutch kettle jams and jellies that are at lots of the farmers markets. That's a co-packing operation. And so farmers can take their product there and have it produced. You pay them for that. And that's not a bad way to go, to test the market and also, just kind of get your feet under you. That's really not a bad way to go at all. So Center for Environmental Farming Systems has a list of co-packers. I'm going to send that. Let me make myself a note. So I need to send that to Tiffany. And I was going to send the post-harvest handling one too. Okay, yeah. So they've got a list of storage area, because a lot of people will need cold storage. Maybe they've had a big harvest and they don't have the cold storage, and so they need cold storage. So there are places that will actually lease cold storage. So Center for Environmental Farming Systems has a map. I don't know how up to date it is, but they've got cold storage, commercial kitchens, co-packers, all that information to help build small food businesses in North Carolina. So I'll share that with Tiffany. I'll have to do a little bit of research to pull that back out, but I'll do that.
Now, I know earlier we mentioned briefly about, let me ask you a question. In terms of being a proprietor, in terms of urban ag, would you recommend going direct to consumer? What are the pros and cons of going direct to consumer versus going through a third party situation?
Well, you're going to make more money direct to consumer because you're basically selling retail. So you get more of the profits. If but then that's also, you've got to figure out what works for you. Maybe you've got a full-time job and you're doing this farming gig on the side and you don't have time and you're not interested in really interacting with people. So you sell it through a small grocery store, like Let It Grow Produce. You sell it, you got another farmer friend who's got a stall at the market and you get them to sell for you and they get a little bit of your, piece of your action. So it just depends on what works. You're going to make more money as a direct seller, but you need to make it work for you.
Okay, thank you.
And there are, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Brandon, if I may ask a couple of questions as well, real quick.
Absolutely, Tiffany.
Thanks. I did see one in the chat though from Irma. Irma was asking a question about the Urban Farm School and if that's still available for those beginning their farm idea as a business.
I'm not sure. I know that, and Cameron might be able to address this better than I can. I know that their Cooperative Extension's in the process of hiring another horticulture agent who would be responsible for that. And I I'm not sure what their plans are. I think they'll do something similar if not the urban farm school. And I don't know, Cameron, if you know more than that.
That's really all I know as well. They just did the first round of interviews for the new horde agent. I've also gotten a lot of questions from community gardeners that are interested in transitioning to urban farming. And I also am we're just hurrying up and waiting until someone's hired. And don't really want to like throw anything in their lap, but I'm really hoping they will revive the program. So
I will. That's great to hear. And I think community gardening is a great segue into, people get into community gardening and they realize, I really like this. I want to do this as a job. So, or I want to do this, as a venture. So that's a great, and that was always kind of how we saw that working, with not for everybody in community gardening, but for some people. But can I give a little bit of a plug? So I'm now working quarter time, I would say, for Memorial Industrial Community Development Corporation to develop a community farm and garden incubator out at Horizons Park. And we're working with Cooperative Extension, and it'll be a site where there can be some farming and gardening programs out there. And we'll also be looking at leasing plots to urban farmers and community gardeners and that sort of thing. So that's on the horizon. No pun intended, but we're not established yet, but we are developing it. And hopefully by this time next year, there would be plots that would definitely be available and being worked, by farmers and gardeners. So, and if you're interested in that, get in touch with me.
Okay. Yeah, and I was going to say, and I'm glad you said that. I was just, everyone, the question, I guess we can redirect that to Mary Jac in terms of the Memorial Industrial Project. I just wanted to see, what were some of the interest criterion for those who had wanted to use that incubator as a launching pad for them to kind of segue back into the public to do their own thing. So I guess, like you were saying, if anyone has any, any questions or anything of that nature, you can contact Mary Jac.
Yeah.
In terms of getting more involved in that initiative.
I was going to put my email in the box to everybody, but I'm having trouble getting it to everybody. So I'm not.
Your MIDC one? Or yeah. I can paste it in there for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I also had another question. It's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I don't know if you can comment on, but just with climate change, how can urban farmers plan to be resilient in the face of that, and kind of think ahead to our changing climate?
Well, there's some advantages to being in an urban setting because you've got the heat island effect, which kind of moderates the climate already. So you don't get, I notice I live on the very eastern side of Winston, kind of out towards Walkertown. And I noticed I was in town yesterday, like really close to Wake Forest. And I noticed, wow, all those things are blooming and they're out. And out at my house, they're not yet. So, that heat island effect, you've got some moderation or modulation going on. But definitely working on building soils, enriching soils. That is going to be, that will help because there's a lot of carbon that's stored in soils. Season extension, there's a farmer out in Pufftown, if y'all know Fair Share Farm. They've put up a bunch of caterpillar tunnels. And I don't know how many they have, maybe 20. But the reason they did that was to protect against the crazy thunderstorms and things that we get that they think is happening because of climate change. So, using a structure to grow in, as crazy as that sounds, that's going to be a way that you can help protect your soil and your plants. You can provide the amount of water that you want. So it is definitely a controlled environment, but those are the kind of things. I think composting is a good thing to do. do it the right way, get educated on that. And, you know, the more green space we have, the better. That's going to help as well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
No, I think that's helpful. I didn't know about what was the, what were you calling it? Island effect?
Oh, the heat island effect. Yeah.
I hadn't heard about that. So that was new for me.
Yeah.
All right, guys, it seems like we had a pretty good first session. I appreciate Mary Jac for coming out.
My pleasure. It's good to see everybody and seeing some faces I hadn't seen in a while. And I hope everybody has a really good growing season.
Absolutely. Tiff?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say thank you. We will have a break until 11:30, and then we'll come back on for community gardening, and Cameron Waters and Brandon will also be leading that session. So we hope you'll come back for that if you can. It's the same Zoom room.
Thanks everyone for making this a good event. Hopefully I see you all at the community garden piece with myself and Cameron. Enjoy.